Hey everyone, Phobos here, coming at you with another build guide, and today I have a Spectral Throw Raider for you that is actually not a Howa build, and Howa being the Herald of Wisdom in Action build that is based around the Herald of Wisdom in Action clause from the new Breach League. But Howa was actually the inspiration for the build, because Spectral Throw is always something I've really loved to play, and I think it's mostly because of the MTX here. But still a fun play style, regardless of MTX or not. And the build kind of got me thinking, the Howa build at least, if you can make Spectral Throw viable again on a budget. Because there was one point in this game where uh, it was called the Buzzsaw, I believe. It was like an elemental Spectral Throw build, and it was pretty budget, and it could clear pretty much anything in the game. And that was one of my favorite times in the game because I love Spectral Throw. And since then, it's been really hard to make effective, viable Spectral Throw characters, so I figured I'd try and make one on a budget that wasn't Howa, and this is what I came up with. And it's not bad. It can clear red maps and stuff like that. It's certainly not going to be a Guardian killer or anything of the sort, as the damage is quite a bit lower. But yeah, so if you like Spectral Throw and you're on a budget, keep watching. Let's get into the build. So we can go over the links first, I guess. Just added lightning damage, faster attacks, LMP. You can swap this with GMP. A lot of Howa builds use GMP. I'm not sure if it's because as you can see, the weapon range on this is 12 and the weapon range on a claw is 9. Um, and that means that the width of the projectile for the claw is going to be slimmer. So possibly that's why people use GMP. I recall back in the day, I think people used LMP for the most part, but you can kind of just swap between and see which one you like more. Obviously, GMP is going to decrease your damage a little bit, but you're going to get a wider spread of projectiles, so there's just a trade-off there. And then Elemental Focus and Weapon Elemental Damage have to stack those more multipliers. And then Spectral Throw with the Seraph Spectral Throw skin, which is obviously required for this build. TM. But yeah, so that's pretty much the links, and well, I'll go over the rest of the gear as well. The chest, by the way, is just life and res, not a ton of evasion or anything like that. Alpha's Hollow is going to be your next big thing with this build, because it's going to basically allow you to run both your main damage auras and still have enough mana left over to attack with Spectral Throw, and especially attack a couple times in case you miss or something like that, or you cast into the distance. And then it also gives you +2 in your aura gems, which is really nice because these are flat aura gems that we're using, and they gain a much bigger increase from getting a level up than something like Hatred would or something like that. So our Wrath is like level 20 right now. Anger still has a little bit to go, but this is effectively a 22, and this is effectively a 20 at the moment. And then we throw Enlighten in there. This is a level 3 Enlighten. I had this, or I purchased this to try and run Herald of Ice with this, but as it turns out, if I try and equip Herald of Ice, I can get the reservation down, but I only have like one cast of Spectral Throw, so it doesn't really work out too well. If you had a bit more reservation, you could run Herald of Ice no problem, especially with a level 3 Enlighten, but certainly not required or anything like that. So you also don't need a level 3 Enlighten if you're not going to run Herald of Ash or Herald of Ice, so don't worry too much about that. Other notable uniques, I'm using Itzuri's Step Slink Boots, but you don't need to use them. It's mostly just because I have my resistance covered elsewhere, and I wanted to pick up the spell dodge because I was also going to be picking up the spell dodge from the Ascendancy as well as the passive tree. So that's why I got these, but you certainly don't need them. For the rest of the gear, you're mostly just stacking life, resist, and wed, and then weapon elemental damage, that is, and flat damage. So the belt, just wed and resist and life. The gloves have attack speed because you can get attack speed on them. Accuracy because you can get accuracy on them. What I normally try to do in a build like this is, so for the slots that you can get something like an attack speed or an accuracy, you want to get it in those slots, and then you look up to make the resist elsewhere. So, for example, you can't get like attack speed on chest, or you can't get accuracy on chest, unless you're using like a special unique chest or something like that. So the chest is where you focus on getting your resist, kind of like the same thing with the shield. Focus on getting resist and health and evasion there. And on the gloves, you can focus on the damage stats. And the rings are sort of like that too. When you're buying rings, I would say you're looking for the wed roll already on the ring, because you can't craft it, and you're not going to try and exalt for wed, because that would be insane, because it's super low percentage chance. So you could always craft the flat though. So as you can see, this has both flat and wed on it. Has the cold damage and the weapon elemental damage, but this ring has the crafted flat damage while having the wed. So that's typically what you'd look for if you can't find a ring that already has both on it like this. And same for the neck, pretty much just flat and wed. And then the weapon, yes, I should talk about the weapon for sure. So normally I like to get 2 high flat rolls and wed on the weapon. As you can see, I have fire, lightning, and a decent amount of wed that I crafted on. Now, if you can get like 3 insane flat rolls, that's also fine. But if you can't do that, then 2 insane flat rolls with wed is perfect. Like, it's much better to craft the wed on this, in my opinion, than to craft like the shitty extra cold damage, because it doesn't really give much, the flat extra cold damage. And then obviously you want attack speed. You want the weapon as close to 2.0 attack speed as possible. This isn't even like really that ideal. You could get it a little bit higher, I believe. I think it goes to like 2.06 or something, but it's pretty much fine. And then any additional accuracy helps, as you can see on here, and I have some nice fire resistance. Another thing you could look for on the weapon, though, is crit, because this isn't actually a crit build, but getting more crit will just help with your consistency in generating the elemental overload buff that you get from critting mobs. It's usually not hard to keep that up anyway, but any little bit of extra crit kind of just gives you a little bit more consistency and insurance on that. So definitely not bad to have some crit there. Unfortunately, the crit multi doesn't do anything for us in the implicit, because it doesn't actually, we don't use crit multi with this build because we get elemental overload. So let's look at the damage. And as you can see, it's 18k here, or around that. Now, when you have full charges, this goes up to full charges and elemental overload up. This goes up to like, I think 48k or something like that. So the damage is pretty decent, and keep in mind that's without, I'm only level 83, I believe. So there's still damage nodes to get in the tree. There's damage to get in the Ascendancy, because this guy actually doesn't even have Merciless Ascendancy, because like I said in another video, I'm kind of just like trying to put these guides out. I'm not really trying to skimp, but I haven't had time to like play these characters to their fullest potential in every case. Like, some of them are really well developed, but others I'm just trying to get the guides out there for 2.6. So yeah, they're not completely finished yet, but it doesn't really matter for demonstrations purposes. Quartz Infusion would just essentially let me go faster. And then if you do Uber Lab, you would get Avatar of the Veil, which would increase your damage a fair amount and give you the status element immunity, which is godly. If you're going hardcore with this, it is worth mentioning that you may want to get Avatar of the Veil first, and then get Way of the Poacher for your Merciless points, and then you can get this for your Uber Lab, the Avatar of the Slaughter, because that's just a safer route, because then you get the dodge, the phasing, and the status element immunity. And you still get a bit of damage there, and the main thing that you're worried about with Raider is Way of the Poacher, and just generating your power charges automatically. So as long as you have this node, you're pretty much good. And I will say, I do want to make a point about how this compares to Hawa's damage, because it's obviously meant to be a budget version of Hawa. Now, like I said, if you get the Ascendancy points and and I level the character up more and I get some more damage from the tree, then I level my auras up, perhaps I get a little bit more reservation, I'm able to add Herald of Ice in here or something like that. Your damage is, you can probably get it to like 50, 55k-ish or so. And that seems pretty good, and it is pretty good. But the thing that you have to keep in mind is that Hawa uses all lightning damage, which is a huge advantage, because you can run lightning penetration and you can pen a large amount of the mob's lightning resistance with how, and I believe it also gets like this node up here, the arcing blow nodes, and possibly even more lightning resistance from other places. So you would just have a ton of lightning penetration with Hawa, and I believe Hawa builds typically do like 60 to 70k DPS tooltip when they have everything popped. If it's like a decent build, I'm sure you can get more than that if you really invested heavily into the build, but I'd say that's a fairly good average estimate from what I've seen. But you have to keep in mind that although that doesn't seem a ton higher than this, they are getting that huge amount of penetration. So they're essentially getting that damage on a 5 link, and then they're running the lightning pen on top of it. So they are doing a lot more damage than you, and that's why this build is definitely limited in what it can do endgame. Like it can do red maps. I'll be showing you a gorge when I link it in the description here, or not in the description, but at the end of the video. But it's definitely not going to be a guardian killer or anything like that, and it's definitely going to be substantially weaker than the actual Hala build, but it's a lot cheaper, so there is that aspect. Uh, as for the auras, just running the Wrath and Anger, and as I said, with the help of the Reservation from the Alpha's Howl, the Enlighten, and then we get Reservation from the tree, we're able to run those just fine with having enough mana left over. We're getting Leech from the tree from this cluster right here, which is nice because it's just attack damage leech, so it's not physical based, so it affects both your elemental and physical attack damage. Then just picking up life and obviously the frenzy charges when you can, and getting the projectile speed and the projectile damage. This node is insane, or the gladiator, because your movement speed and the attack speed and the accuracy, it's just an insane node. Should have this gem slot for sure. You come up here mostly just to get elemental overload. You pick up some elemental damage on the way. And there's a ton more health here you can get. And there's health here you can get. Get one more health node here. And I'm planning to also fill out phase acrobatics over here. This actually can be removed. This is just here for, while leveling. I find you get plenty of mana just with these nodes over here. So this can go into probably phase acrobatics or whatever. So that's pretty much the build. And oh yeah, I also use static electricity, which is really good for just adding lightning damage. You can also put another one here if you wanted. And Volpact is right up here, which I was planning on getting next pretty much, because Volpact is really, really good, obviously. And yeah, so that's pretty much the build. The only other thing is there's an elemental weakness that I use for a single target. I just cast it on the mob, and that gives you a ton of pen, and it pens all the elemental resistances, so that's nice. And then use Rallying Cry for damage, and it can help with the mana, but this build doesn't really struggle too much with mana anymore. Like I said, you can even remove those other nodes I mentioned in the tree, and you'll be fine. The golem choice, I should talk about that, I guess. It's you could use the lightning golem as well, and that's absolutely fine, but I like the ice golem because it just gives you a little bit of extra consistency on your elemental overload, and it gives you much needed accuracy, and it's percentage based, so it multiplies the flat accuracy that we've been getting on some of the gear and stuff like that. So that's pretty much the build, and yeah, I probably said that like 5 times already. Using a promise, that's really the only notable flask. You can use like a basalt here or something. I had stripped the flask of this character. And obviously if you're going to use Volpact, use instant life flasks if you're going to use any at all. And that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns or anything like that, feel free to leave them in the description. I'll be posting the build there as well, and I will post a gorge clear at the end of this video very soon. So yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.